There is a certain kind of man who does not announce that he is tired. You usually find him late at night, when the house has gone quiet and the rest of the world has stopped asking him for things. The kitchen light is still on, but only one of them, not the bright one, just the small light over the stove, throwing a soft yellow glow across the counter. The refrigerator hums in the background. A coffee mug sits half empty beside a set of keys. His boots are near the door. His hoodie is hanging over the back of a chair like it has been there for 3 days, because it probably has. He is standing at the counter, not really doing much. Maybe he is wiping down a surface that is already clean. Maybe he is tightening a loose handle on a cabinet. Maybe he is checking the lock again before bed. Maybe he is standing in the garage with the door half open, listening to an old song playing low through cheap speakers, the kind of song that still remembers a version of him nobody else does. He does not look dramatic. He does not look broken. He does not look like a man waiting to be rescued. He just looks contained, calm, but not empty, alone, but not helpless, tired, but not defeated. There is a kind of weather in his face, not sadness exactly, not anger, something quieter than both. The look of a man who has handled too many things without making a speech about any of them. And if you only saw him from the outside, you might think he is emotionally distant. You might think he does not feel much, but that would be a mistake, because this is the kind of man who remembers everything. He remembers when the oil needs changing. He remembers which drawer has the spare batteries. He remembers the sound the dryer made before it broke. He remembers what his kid used to eat without asking. He remembers birthdays, even if he does not always know what to say on them. He remembers old songs, old cars, old arguments, old streets, old mistakes. He remembers 1,987 inches a way he cannot explain without sounding ridiculous. His emotions are not missing. They are stored in routines. They are in the way he keeps tools organized, in the way he checks the house before sleeping, in the way he cooks too much food when someone visits, in the way he fixes things instead of talking about what is wrong, in the way he listens more than he admits, in the way he can sit alone for hours and still somehow be carrying 5 different people in his head. Men born between 1,965 and 1,980 often get misunderstood this way. They can seem hard to read, hard to reach, hard to impress, hard to comfort. They do not always explain themselves. They do not trust every new emotional language that comes along. They can smell fake sincerity from across a parking lot. They would rather have silence than small talk, competence than performance, loyalty than public affection. And sometimes, even when they are surrounded by people, they still feel like they are standing slightly outside the room, not because they do not care, because somewhere along the way, they learned that caring too visibly could cost them something, so they became self-contained. They learned to regulate emotion through action. Driving, working, cooking, repairing, lifting, cleaning, listening to music, standing in the garage after midnight pretending they are just looking for something. They learn to connect side by side instead of face to face, over a grill, under a hood, in a truck, at a workbench, during a song, through a joke that sounds like nothing but actually means, I'm still here. This is not a stereotype. It is a psychological map, because a man does not become this quiet by accident. He does not become this independent, this skeptical, this competent, this allergic to drama, this protective of his peace, simply because of personality. Something built him. A childhood, a culture, a generation, a house that was empty after school, a world before constant contact, parents who were busy, tired, divorced, working, surviving, or emotionally distant in ways they never had language for. A time when boys were told to figure it out, walk it off, don't make a scene, don't be a problem. And many of them did exactly that. They figured it out. They walked it off. They became useful. They became calm. They became the kind of men who can fix almost anything except the feeling that nobody ever really asked how heavy it was to become this self-sufficient. So when you see that man late at night, standing in the kitchen with the stove light on, or in the garage with the radio low, or in the driveway before going inside, you are not just looking at a lonely man. You are looking at a generation's emotional history, standing quietly in work boots, saying nothing, because silence was the first language he ever mastered. But the quiet did not begin in that kitchen. It did not begin in the garage, or the driveway, or the long pause before answering a message. It began much earlier. Men born between 1965 and 1980 came of age in a strange emotional middle ground. They were not raised entirely inside the old world, where rules were fixed and authority was rarely questioned. But they were not raised in the modern world either, where every feeling has a name, every mood has a post, and every child can be reached within 3 seconds. They grew up in the gap, a gap between supervision and freedom, between neglect and independence, between toughness and confusion, between being loved and not always being emotionally understood. And that gap shaped them. It taught them to become self-contained before they even knew what self-contained meant. It taught them that boredom was something you survived, fear was something you hid, pain was something you walked off, loneliness was something you turned into music, movement, sarcasm, or work. This is why many Gen X men do not experience emotion as something that must be announced. They experience emotion as something that must be managed. Not always in a healthy way. Not always in a destructive way either. Just in the way they were trained to survive. A younger person might feel anxiety and talk about it. A Gen X man might feel the same thing and reorganize the garage. He might drive nowhere for 40 minutes. He might clean a grill that is already clean. He might cook enough food for people who are not coming over. He might put on an old album and suddenly remember a bedroom, a street, a girl, a friend, a father, a version of himself that disappeared without ceremony. And if you ask him what he is feeling, he may say, nothing. But nothing does not always mean nothing. Sometimes it means the feeling has been filed somewhere private, somewhere behind the ribs, somewhere language cannot reach without making him feel exposed. For this generation of men, competence became emotional safety. If you could fix the problem, you did not have to explain the pain. If you could stay calm, you did not have to admit you were scared. If you could be useful, nobody would ask too many questions. That is the hidden pattern. The silence is not emptiness. The routine is not boredom. The skepticism is not bitterness. The need for peace is not weakness. These are adaptations, built slowly, reinforced over decades, protected by humor, habits, tools, work, music, and the deep private belief that needing too much from other people is dangerous. So before we judge the distance in these men, we have to understand the world that taught them distance first. A man does not learn that kind of silence at 50. Usually, it starts in a hallway after school. The door opens to an empty house. No one is in the kitchen. No one is asking how the day went. The television is off, or maybe it is already on because silence feels too large when you are 12 years old. There is cereal in the cabinet, maybe a frozen dinner in the freezer, maybe a note on the counter with 2 instructions and no emotional decoration. Lock the door. Don't answer the phone. Your mother will be home at 6. That was childhood for a lot of boys born between 1965 and 1980. Not always tragic, not always cruel. Sometimes it was just normal. Parents worked, marriages cracked, money was tight, adults were tired. The world had not yet decided that children needed constant supervision, constant communication, constant emotional explanation. So they learned to exist in the gaps. They learned the sound of an empty house. They learned which floorboards creaked. They learned how to make food without asking. They learned what neighborhoods felt safe, which older kids to avoid, how far they could ride their bikes before anyone noticed, and how to get themselves home before the streetlights made it official. They were raised by parents, yes, but also by television glow, older siblings, parking lots, arcades, record stores, basement bedrooms, school buses, malls, woods, garages, and the long, unsupervised afternoons where a boy quietly met himself. There was freedom in it, real freedom, the kind that made them capable, the kind that gave them instincts, the kind that taught them how to solve problems without waiting for permission. A broken bike was not a crisis. It was a puzzle. A locked door was not trauma. It was Tuesday. Boredom was not treated like an emergency. It was where imagination, trouble, music, and independence came from. But freedom has a shadow. When a child gets used to handling too much alone, independence stops being a skill and starts becoming an identity. That boy grows up learning that needing help is inconvenient. That fear is private. That sadness is something you distract yourself from. That if no one asks, you do not volunteer the answer. That if something hurts, you keep moving until it becomes background noise. And later, when he becomes a man, people wonder why he does not open up easily. They miss the fact that he spent years being trained by empty rooms. He learned early that adults could love you and still not be available, that people could care and still not notice, that home could be safe and lonely at the same time. That contradiction shaped him. It made him observant. He learned to read moods before words. He could tell when a parent had a bad day by the way keys hit the counter. He could feel tension in a room before anyone said anything. He learned when to talk, when to disappear, when to make himself useful, and when to stay out of the way. Analog life deepened all of it. There was no location sharing, no instant text, no soft digital trail connecting every person to every other person. If someone left the house, they were gone. If a friend moved away, they became a memory. If a song mattered, you waited for it on the radio or wore out the tape, playing it again and again. Objects carried emotion because people were harder to reach. A cassette, a jacket, a pocket knife, a baseball glove, a toolbox, a photograph, a first car with a bad starter, and a radio that only worked when it wanted to. These things became anchors, proof that something real had happened. This is where adult Gen X masculinity begins to make sense. The man who keeps tools organized was once a boy trying to create control. The man who hates asking for help was once a child who learned not to expect it quickly. The man who loves silence may also be the boy who survived too much of it, not broken, conditioned. And childhood conditioning, when repeated long enough, stops feeling like memory. It starts feeling like personality. Psychology has a way of putting names on things men have been doing quietly for years. Not fancy names for the sake of sounding smart, just language for patterns that were already there. When researchers talk about attachment, they are often asking one simple question. When you needed someone, what did the world teach you to expect? For many Gen X boys, the answer was complicated. Adults were not always cruel. They were not always absent. But they were often busy, working, divorced, distracted, exhausted, or carrying their own unspoken pressure. So the boy learned something subtle. People may love you, but they may not always be available. Help may come, but not immediately. Comfort may exist, but it may not arrive in the form you needed. That lesson can build a capable man. It can also build a man who feels strange when he has to depend on anyone. This is why some Gen X men can stay calm during a crisis, fix the pipe, handle the bill, drive through the storm, sit beside someone in the hospital, and still feel awkward saying, "I need help." Their nervous system learned action before expression. Emotional regulation research tells us people calm themselves in different ways. Some talk, some reach out, some name the feeling. But many men from this generation regulate through physical control. They clean, drive, repair, cook, organize, mow the lawn, stand over a grill, take apart something mechanical and put it back together. To someone else, it may look like avoidance. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it is the body trying to create order when the mind has too much noise. There is something regulating about repetition, the turn of a wrench, the rhythm of a knife on a cutting board, the slow pass of a lawnmower, the weight of a cast iron pan, the sound of an old song through garage speakers. These are not just activities. They lower the volume inside. Sociology adds another layer. Gen X grew up watching institutions lose their shine. Families changed. Divorce became common. Jobs became less secure. Television got louder. Advertising got smarter. Politics became theatrical. The old promises did not always hold, and the new promises sounded suspicious. So skepticism became intelligence. Sarcasm became social armor. A dry joke became safer than confession. And when the digital age arrived, These men adapted, but they never fully belonged to it. They remember a world where leaving the house meant disappearing. They remember when privacy was normal, not suspicious. They remember when you could sit with boredom without a glowing screen asking if you were still there. That matters psychologically, because they became the last analog men and the first digital survivors. Part of them learned through hands, roads, radios, tools, paper maps, consequences, and actual silence. Another part had to learn email, phones, passwords, availability, and a world where everyone seemed to be performing a version of themselves. No wonder they trust reality more when it has weight. A tool in the hand, coffee in a mug, smoke from a grill, rain on a windshield. A song that still sounds like proof. Research can explain the categories, but ordinary life shows the truth more clearly. Less expressive does not mean less feeling. Solitary does not mean antisocial. Calm does not mean numb. And silence, in men like this, is rarely empty. Sometimes it is a whole life, compressed into a face that learned long ago not to give everything away. You can learn a lot about a Gen X man by watching what he does when nobody is asking him to perform. Not what he posts, not what he explains, what he returns to. The same coffee mug every morning. The same route to work, even when another road might be faster. The same chair in the same corner of the room. The same way of checking the locks before bed. The same playlist that has survived every format change from cassette to CD to phone, although he still trusts the old speakers more than the Bluetooth one. To someone else, these routines may look ordinary. To him, they are structure. And structure matters when you were raised in a world where things did not always feel emotionally organized. A routine gives the day a spine. It makes life feel manageable. It says quietly, "This part is still mine." This is why tools matter. A toolbox, to some men, is just a box full of metal. To a Gen X man, it can be a biography. The socket set he bought when money was tight. The hammer that belonged to his father. The pocket knife he has carried for 20 years. The grill that has seen more honest silence than most living rooms. The cast iron pan seasoned through years of breakfasts, arguments, hangovers, quiet Sundays, and meals cooked for people he did not know how to emotionally reach. These objects are not decoration. They are proof of competence, and competence, for men like this, is not ego. It is emotional safety. If he can fix something, cook something, sharpen something, build something, clean something, or make something work again, then for a while, the world makes sense. That is why the garage becomes more than a garage. It becomes a private, emotional climate. The fluorescent light, the smell of oil, dust, cardboard, old paint, gasoline, and cold concrete. The radio playing low in the corner. A workbench that looks messy to everyone else but has its own internal logic. Coffee going cold beside a tape measure. A dog lying near the door. A man standing there for 20 minutes, holding a wrench, not because the job requires that much thought, but because he does. The garage is where frustration becomes motion. Grief becomes sanding. Anxiety becomes sorting screws. Loneliness becomes a song from 1991 that hits harder than it has any right to. And then there is food. For many older Gen X men, cooking or grilling becomes one of the few socially acceptable forms of tenderness. He may not say much. He may not ask deep questions. He may not sit everyone down and explain what they mean to him. But he remembers how you like your steak. He remembers what his kid used to eat. He knows who wants the burnt edges, who hates onions, who drinks coffee black, and who pretends they are not hungry but will eat if a plate is put in front of them. That is care. Quiet, practical, easily missed care. Quiet, practical, easily missed care. Music works the same way. For this generation, music is not background noise. It is emotional storage. A song can take him back to a first car, a bedroom with posters on the wall, a friend he has not seen in 30 years, a woman he never fully got over, a father he understood too late, or a version of himself that had more hair, less money, and no idea how fast time would move. He does not always talk about memory. He plays it. He drives with it. He stands in the garage and lets it fill the room. This is why solitude rituals matter so much. The early coffee before sunrise. The hardware store walk with no real urgency. The quiet drive. The grill smoke at dusk. The old movie he has seen too many times. The lawn cut in straight lines. The dog beside him. The silence after everyone leaves. These are not empty habits. They are how he returns to himself. Because for many Gen X men, identity was never built through confession. It was built through usefulness, through repetition, through objects with weight, through skill, through private standards, through the quiet satisfaction of making something work when nobody clapped, posted, liked, or even noticed. And maybe that is why peace matters so much now. Not because he has given up on life, but because he has spent most of it keeping things running. But there is another side to all that silence. Not a dramatic side, not the kind that needs music swelling underneath it. Just the quiet truth that solitude and loneliness can live dangerously close to each other. For many Gen X men, solitude is not a problem. It is peace. It is the first deep breath after a long day of being required. It is the house finally still, the phone finally quiet, the demands finally gone. No performance, no explaining, no emotional negotiation. No one asking what is wrong when nothing is wrong, exactly. But nothing feels simple either. Being alone can feel like control. It can feel like safety. It can feel like the only room where a man does not have to translate himself. But sometimes the same silence that protects him also hides him. Sometimes independence becomes so complete that nobody knows when he is tired. Sometimes competence becomes so convincing that people stop asking if he needs anything. Sometimes a man becomes so good at not being a burden that the world quietly accepts the arrangement. And that is where the cost begins. It shows up in small, ordinary moments. A single plate on the kitchen table, a television playing mostly for noise, a phone lighting up, then going dark. A message he thinks about answering, then leaves for later, until later becomes next week. A birthday he remembers, but does not know how to approach. A person he misses, but not enough to risk sounding needy. He tells himself he is fine, and most of the time, he may be. That is the complicated part. He is not pretending every second. He may genuinely like his space. He may enjoy the quiet house, the empty garage, the drive with no conversation, the freedom to arrange his life without drama. But liking solitude does not erase the human need to be known. And that need is difficult for a man who learned early that needing anything too visibly could make him vulnerable, inconvenient, or weak. So the loneliness becomes disciplined. It does not cry out. It does not announce itself. It becomes irritability, dry humor, long drives, extra work, avoided calls, a sudden need to clean the kitchen at midnight, a little too much time in the garage, a tired face in the bathroom mirror before he turns the light off. This is not weakness. It is emotional fatigue. The fatigue of being steady for decades. The fatigue of handling bills, breakdowns, divorces, jobs, aging parents, children, repairs, private regrets, and all the small disappointments. No one applauds a man for surviving. There is dignity in that. But there is also weight, because there is a cost to always being the one who handles it. And maybe this is what people miss about men born between 1965 and 1980. They are not simple men. They may live simply. They may dress simply. They may say less than they feel. They may prefer an old chair, an old song, an old truck, an old routine, and a quiet night where nobody needs anything from them. But that does not make them empty. It makes them layered. They carry analog memories in a digital world. They remember what it was like to disappear for hours and come home when the streetlights came on. They remember phones attached to walls, songs taped from radios, fathers who rarely explained themselves, mothers who were tired, friends who vanished into adulthood, and younger versions of themselves they still meet sometimes in the middle of a song. They became men who love through consistency. They grieve through silence. They think while doing. They regulate through work. They protect through presence. They remember through objects. They care in ways that are easy to overlook if you only listen for words. And no, many of them may never become fluent in the modern language of public vulnerability. They may never explain every feeling cleanly. They may never turn pain into a speech, loneliness into a post, or love into something polished enough for other people to easily recognize. But that does not mean there is nothing there. It means the emotional language is older, quieter, more physical, less decorated. Maybe these men do not need to be reinvented. Maybe they need to be understood in the language they actually speak. So picture him again, the man in the garage, the kitchen, the driveway, the dim hallway after midnight. He turns off the light, checks the lock, puts the tools back where they belong, leaves the mug in the sink because morning is close enough now, and walks back into the quiet house. Not saved, not broken, just understood.